What does a guitar have to do with the religious revolution? Much more than you can imagine. Martin Luther transformed not only Christian worship, but also the very history of the Church. Discover how one man changed the course of religious music forever, and how his legacy lives on today. Don't miss it. The Protestant Reformation that Martin Luther initiated in 1517 was not only a profound change to Christian doctrine, but also a cultural revolution that affected the music of the churches. Before Luther, music in the services was reserved for the clergy and a small group of specialized choirs. Furthermore, songs were sung in Latin, a language that most churchgoers did not understand. This created a great distance between the people and the church's teachings, for although music played an important role in the liturgy, people could neither understand the songs nor actively participate in worship. Luther, who was both a theologian and a musician, recognized that music could be a powerful tool to make the church more accessible to all. Luther broke with this tradition. For him, worship should not be something only clergy could experience, but something that would involve all believers. One of the most decisive decisions was that hymns should be sung in the German people's language instead of in Latin. This not only made it possible for everyone to understand what was being sung, but also gave congregations the opportunity to participate in a shared experience of worship. For Luther, music was to be an integral part of faith and something that connected people not only with God, but also with one another as a Christian community. Another important aspect of the role of music in the Reformation was that Luther not only adapted traditional hymns, but also composed new melodies. He personally wrote songs that congregations could sing. The hymn, "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God," "Where God Is, There Is a Firm Abode," is one of the most famous, composed by Luther in 1529. With a simple melody and a profound message about God's protection, this hymn became a symbol of the Reformation and was sung in thousands of churches across Europe. Like many of Luther's hymns, it also conveyed Christian teaching, especially the idea of justification by faith and a core principle in Lutheran theology. Luther was not only a reformer on the theological level, but also a cultural innovator. By introducing congregational singing, he made music a means to educate the faithful in Reformation principles. This transformation of church music had a significant impact in the Protestant Church and changed the way Christians related to God and to each other. In this way, Luther left a musical legacy that still lives on in many Protestant traditions today. The impact of the Lutheran Reformation on Christian music was profound and transformative. In a time when church music was limited to the clergy and monks, Luther decided to democratize it. For him, worship should be a collective and active experience, not merely an act performed by the priest and the choir. Luther understood that the people should take part fully in worship, and that music should therefore be a tool that everyone had access to. Translating the hymns into the vernacular was only the beginning. Luther promoted the idea that every churchgoer should be able to sing and understand it. He sang, which elevated the liturgy to a level of massive participation. The congregational singing that Luther introduced not only made it possible for the people to participate actively, but also strengthened the sense of community. It was no longer about listening to a choir, singing in Latin. Now all the believers could unite in a choir of voices, bonded together by the same faith and the same language. This act of singing together represented a form of communion that transcended social and economic barriers, as everyone, regardless of status, could participate equally. This was one of the Reformation's most significant innovations and marked a before and after in church music. In addition, Luther also changed the way music was perceived in church. Music ceased to merely be a means of praising God. Luther promoted the idea that music was also an educational tool, a way to convey the principles of faith. The hymns Luther wrote, such as "Where God Is a Stronghold," were not merely praises but theological lessons disguised as music. Through them, the congregation not only praised God, but also learnt about divine grace, justification by faith, and other fundamental pillars of Lutheran theology. By enabling congregations to sing in their own language, Luther not only changed church music, but also the way people related to God. It was no longer necessary to be an expert in Latin or dependent on priests who performed the service in an inaccessible language. Now any Christian could express their faith in a personal and direct way by actively participating in worship. This accessibility not only strengthened the church community, but also helped the Reformation win followers, as Luther's teachings could be grasped not only through preaching, but also through music. Luther did not only change music in the church, he also redefined the relationship of believers to worship. In the medieval Catholic tradition, it was the priests and the choir that were responsible for music during the Mass, while the congregation remained silent and merely observed. Luther's Reformation brought a fundamental change in this area. Music became a communal activity. By allowing congregants to sing in their own language, he not only gave them a voice in the service, but also encouraged them to actively participate in worship and in the communication of faith. Luther understood that music was not only a way to praise God, but also a means to teach the people the fundamental principles of Christianity. The hymns Luther composed and spread were carefully crafted to convey theology. For example, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God" spoke not only of God's protection but also conveyed the doctrine of justification by faith. This was a central doctrine in the Reformation and a main theme in Luther's writings. Through music, the faithful experienced not only the feeling of worship, but also internalized the theological principles Luther wanted them to understand. Music became an effective tool for religious education. Luther also urged his followers to be active participants in the creation and performance of music. Before his intervention, church choirs were led by priests and monks, but Luther promoted the idea that the whole congregation could be involved. Thus, congregational singing not only enabled everyone to participate in worship, but also gave them the opportunity to be co-creators of their faith through musical expression. In this way, Luther brought music into people's everyday lives, allowed them to sing in their homes, in the streets and in their towns, thus spreading the influence of the Reformation beyond the walls of churches. Over time, Luther's music spread to other Protestant traditions, and his influence spread across Europe. The Calvinist, Anglican, and other Protestant congregations adopted the principle of congregational singing, and many of Luther's hymns were included in their hymnals. The Reformation not only changed the way people worshiped God, but also left a legacy in Christian music. Luther's teachings, both theological and musical, remains fundamental in Protestant churches worldwide. As the Protestant Reformation spread, Luther's influence on Christian music became even more pronounced. Luther not only composed hymns and songs for Lutheran churches, but also encouraged others to write music that reflected the Reformation doctrines. At the same time, composers like Philip Nicolai and Paul Spiritus were inspired by his example and began writing hymns that reinforced Reformation principles. Music ceased to be merely a means of worship and became a tool for theological teaching. That spread Luther's teachings to a wider audience. One of the most remarkable features of Lutheran music was its simplicity. Luther promoted the use of melodies that were easy to sing, so that the whole congregation could join in the singing. Music should not be an art form reserved for experts, but something that all believers could experience regardless of musical skill. In this way, Lutheran hymns became accessible to large parts of the population, not just for priests or specialized choirs. This made music a means of inclusive participation, where any churchgoer could feel like an active part of the service. Luther also changed the perception of music in the church by giving it a central place in Christian worship. In the Middle Ages, music was often seen as a secondary activity, but Luther gave it a prominent role in the liturgy. He not only encouraged congregational singing, but also introduced the use of music in other aspects of daily life. Lutheran hymns were not only sung in church, but also in homes, on the streets, and in family gatherings. Reformational music became an integral part of the Christians' daily lives. Along the church wall loomed Great Wool. Luther's musical legacy extended beyond the Lutheran churches. His teachings, both in music and theology, spread to other Protestant traditions such as Calvinism and Anglicanism. Congregational singing was introduced in many Protestant churches across Europe and beyond. And Luther's songs like "Where God is a Fortress" were sung in many languages and across different cultures. The Reformation not only changed the way people worshiped God, but also left a lasting influence on Christian music that continues to this day. Luther's legacy in Christian music transformed not only worship in Lutheran churches, but also left an indelible mark on Protestant traditions worldwide. As the Reformation spread, Luther's ideas about congregational singing were quickly adopted in other Protestant denominations, such as the Calvinist and Anglican churches. Music became a defining part of Christian worship, especially in Protestant churches. Instead of focusing solely on the priest and clergy, Luther's Reformation made it possible for all believers to participate actively in worship by singing hymns that expressed their faith. Luther's influence on music was not limited to the songs he wrote himself, as his impact extended far beyond that. Many later composers were inspired by his example to create music that reflected the theological principles of the Reformation. The use of simple and easily accessible melodies for the congregation became a standard in many Protestant traditions. This enabled churches across social strata to partake in worship, regardless of musical background. Music was no longer an activity reserved for experts, but an inclusive way to praise God. Today, Protestant churches around the world still follow Luther's musical legacy. Hymns such as "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God" continue to be sung in Lutheran, Anglican, Calvinist, and many other Christian congregations. These hymns remain powerful tools for teaching, not only in doctrine, but also as a way to create an emotional connection between the faithful and God. Music remains one of the most effective tools in Christian worship, and Luther's example lives on in the way churches sing and worship today. The Reformation's influence on Christian music extends beyond traditional churches. Today, many Lutheran hymns and songs based on Luther's theology are still performed at concerts, recordings, and on other platforms for Christian music. His influence has not only survived in the church's liturgy, but has also left a cultural mark on modern Christian music. The Reformation not only changed the way we worship, but transformed Christian music forever and allowed each generation to actively participate in praising God through music. If you were surprised by how Luther changed music in the church, then subscribe now, give it a like, and activate the bell, so you can keep learning about the history of the Reformation and how it still influences modern worship. Don't miss any content about the Protestant Reformation and its influence on Christianity today.